Okay, we begin the Torah with the portion of Bereshis, which is the first portion of the book of Genesis. And it begins, Bereshis bara Elokim. In the beginning, God created Eser Shamayim V'Soretz, heaven and earth, the heaven and the earth. Now, the first thing that comes to mind, if the world is random, just came into being, whether you believe in the Big Bang Theory or whatever you believe in, that there was no creator. It just happened to happen. So then you're able to say there's no rhyme or reason. Everything's random. But the moment we speak about a creator creating, that means he had a reason to create. Because why should he create such a world or anything unless he had an objective in that creation? So it begins in the beginning, God created heaven and earth. Now the question is, there's many questions. Why did he create heaven and earth? What was the objective? I always say, could you imagine the United States government builds a laboratory for $3 trillion and they let you go in there and they say, figure it out for yourself. Would that make sense? And it's such a delicate and sophisticated laboratory, the slightest mistake could actually destroy the whole laboratory or cause a level of damage, which is unconscionable level of loss. It would make sense that if you build such a laboratory, you train people prior they enter into the laboratory, or you write a manual that the people who enter into the laboratory know exactly how to navigate and utilize and allow that laboratory to address why it was meant to be created. God creates, in the beginning, God created heaven and earth. It's totally absurd to say that God creates heaven and earth, and he doesn't allude at any level what the objective of that creation is. I always mention this. You know, my knowledge about certain things may be, relatively speaking, archaic. When they first sent up the Hubble telescope, they sent up another one recently. The first images that came back from space was 1,000 miles of space dust. Excuse me, 1,000,000 miles, 1,000,000 miles of space dust. You know what 1,000,000 miles, what that is? We can't even fathom what 1,000,000 miles is. And that's space dust. And beyond that, it keeps going. So if you believe God created this existence, terrestrial, celestial, heavenly bodies, outer space, and beyond the 1,000,000 miles of space dust goes beyond that, that means it's something not to be understood what this creation is at any level. And what is God's capacity and capability? It's unlimited. Many years ago, there was an article in the National Geographic that there was a volcano that was about to erupt. And there was a photographer. He wanted to film the inside of a volcano prior to eruption. So he walked the periphery of the volcano, the perimeter of the volcano with his camera. The heat was at such a level, the lens nearly melted in the camera. The gases were coming out of the volcano were poisonous. He nearly was asphyxiated. But he was able to get the shots of the molten lava prior to eruption. It was something terrifying, not to be believed. But this is a small aspect of existence. Volcano. The ocean, the depths of the ocean, the species, the mountains, vegetation. Locations where there's no gravity. the gravitational pull of the universe, the sun, the moon. If it would be any closer, the world would be consumed by the heat of the sun. It's close enough but far enough that we have all the benefits of the sun. The moon, it affects the tides, affects many other things. And the more advanced we become, when we realize what they are, and the less we understand. God created all this. Does it make sense? He say created all this without giving us an inkling of why he created this? Why did he create all this? What's the objective? What's the purpose? It's a very fundamental question. Evidently, he does allude to why he created it. But there's a verse but just the concept in itself of creation. Who is the center of the universe? Who is the most sophisticated being of creation? The human being. The human being is endowed with intellect. There's no other, even if you want to say an animal, has some kind of level of intellect. It's not instinctive behavior, but there's intellect. And the human being is also an animal intellect. It's more advanced, but the human being has a superior intellect over the animal. Whatever you want to classify the animal's intellect, or what you want to identify human intellect. But the human being is the most unique creation of existence. Now, why did God create the human being? If you believe in a creator. And it's not the evolutionary process, how it all came about. He created Adam, as the story reads in the Torah, on the sixth day of creation. After he creates all existence, the last aspect of creation is the creation of the human being. Creates his physicality, infuses him with a soul of life. That's the human being. He's a composite, spiritual, physical. So firstly, Rabbeinu Bachya points out, why was the human being created the last of creation? That only tells you that all existence that preceded him, the objective was to accommodate him, his needs. You need this massive, unlimited universe to address his objective. What's his objective? That's a new question. But clearly from the sequence of creation, being the last on the pecking order, that tells me he's the most important. Everything had to be in place, and now he's brought on the scene. For him to utilize all this existence for whatever his objective is, which that's the big secret. What is his objective? What's his purpose? But King David tells us in Psalms, why did God create existence? If God is infinite, that means there's no beginning, there's no end. There's no deficiencies in God. He's lacking nothing. Because if he's not contained in anything, but he's everything, why did he create existence? God has no needs. Need means you're lacking. God is lacking in nothing. God is perfect on the absolute level. So why did he create existence? So David HaMelech, King David tells us in Psalms, he says, Olam chesed yibodeh. The world was created purely due to God's indiscriminate kindness. He had no obligation. He had no reason. It's only because it was his indiscriminate kindness. And the Ramchal, Rabbi Luzzatto, explains it to mean that God being absolute, perfect, that means in goodness, good on the absolute sense exists within God. Good does good, not because he has a need to do good. Something good does good. Give you an example. A person's a good person. And he sees a person needing. A person needs help, and he's able to help him. Does he have a need to help him? But because he's that quality person, he wants to help that person. It's not that he has a need. Multiply this infinite levels to God. God is good on the absolute level and need of nothing. But God wants to create an opportunity, which is the ultimate level of goodness, that if he creates a creation who could be a beneficiary of his goodness, which is having a relationship with him, that's the ultimate chesed. That's the ultimate kindness. But what's the impetus? There's no impetus. It's only because good does good. That's olam chesed yibareh. The world was created purely, it's rooted in God's chesed, indiscriminate kindness. Because a man who's created now should succeed and become an achiever due to his own initiative, because he's the only being that is not dictated by instinct, but rather by free choice. If he makes the right choice, that right choice is fully attributed to his own initiative, not to anybody but himself. Therefore, he himself is the beneficiary of his choice. And as a result of that, he's able to cleave to the source of all goodness. So that's the ultimate kindness. That's why God created existence. So we understand man should be a beneficiary. But what does man have to do to be worthy to be the beneficiary? What initiatives must he take? What's the purpose? Man should be a beneficiary. And how does he become a beneficiary? Where does the Torah allude to exactly what the objective is for that purpose? That he be worthy if he takes the initiative, which is attributed to his own initiative, that he should be a beneficiary of the result of that initiative. It's alluded in the first word of the Torah. Bereshis bara Elokim. Bereshis bara Elokim, those three words. In the beginning, God created. And Rashi cites the Midrash. The word Bereshis, the Torah could have said Borishona, bara Elokim. At the very beginning, God created. Borishona, Rishon means first. At the very first moment, God created heaven and earth. What's Bereshis? Bereshis, the word Bereshis should be read, Bishvil Reshis. For the sake of Reshis, God created existence. What's referred to as Reshis? Reshis means the choicest, the most special. Bishvil Torah shenikras Reshis. Because of Torah, which is classified and quantified as Reshis. That's God's wisdom. That's the ultimate. God created the world, that this is the playing field for every challenge, which is within the context of Torah. Okay? Now, which human being is responsible, has to live up to that challenge? Bishvil Yisrael shenikras Reshis. For the sake of the Jewish people, that they are called the choicest, the one of a kind. So the objective of creation is what? Is the Torah. That the Torah should be met and addressed and actualized, and which people have relevance and have the capacity and the potential to be able to live within the conforms of the Torah and meet its challenges and generate that level of holiness. It's only the Jewish people. That's alluded in the first word, Bereshis bara Elokim. For the sake of Reshis, God created heaven and earth. So God gives us the eye opener. What's the direction? That's the objective of creation. Now there's a question which Rashi cites from the Midrash. Rabbi Yitzchak asks a question. What is the first mitzvah that was given to the Jewish people to the Jewish people? The mitzvah of sanctification of the new moon. Before we left Egypt, right before the month of Nisan, God says to Moshe, this is the month which is the beginning of all months. This month is the first of the months. Which is the first of the months? The month of Nisan, the month that we left Egypt. That's counted as the first month of the year. The Torah refers to Nisan as Chodesh HaRishon. That's the first month. because that's the month we left Egypt. That was the launching pad to Sinai, which ultimately led to address the objective of existence. That's now, how does the month become a month? You have to sanctify the month, because the Torah tells us that on the 10th of the month, each Jewish family, took a lamb or a goat to be used for the Paschal lamb, to be examined. Had to be examined for 4 days. On the 14th of Nisan, it was slaughtered. On the 15th night, when we were behind closed doors, when the 10th plague was taking place, at midnight, the Jews were participating and eating the Paschal lamb. Now the question is, when does the month start? When is the 10th of the month? When's the 14th of the month? When's the 15th of the month? That's determined by the rabbinic court. God gave the ability to the Jewish people to have dominance over time, to sanctify time. So the month, the first day of Nisan, was determined by the court ruling, by the new moon. This is the beginning of the month. Within Jewish law, a month could either be a 29-day month or a 30-day month. It's all determined by the court. When the court determines and decides is the first day of the month. So when the court determines is the first day of the month, that will tell us when the 10th day of the month is. And if I know the 10th day, I know when the 14th day is. And if I know when the 14th, I know when the 15th is. And this was all integral for the Jewish people to bring that Paschal lamb, which was the litmus test, whether we will succeed or not. Because the lamb, the ram, the goat was the deity of Egypt. The Jews had themselves circumcised and they slaughtered the deity, which was a total negation from idolatry. So if that was the first mitzvah given to us as a Jewish people, and the Torah is all about mitzvos, our commandments, with which law should the Torah begin? The mitzvah of sanctification of new moon. Now with the creation of existence. So why does the Torah begin with creation? It gives us the historical background of how creation came into being. That's Rabbi Yitzchak's question. But to elucidate the question, the Maharal explains, we just completed the Torah with the portion of Zos HaBrocha. Moshe Rabbeinu says to the Jewish people, Torah tzivilon Moshe Morasha Kilas Yaakov. The Torah was commanded to us by Moshe. It is the heritage of the congregation of Jacob. Now, why is Torah referred to as Torah? What is the meaning of Torah? We find that Moshe blessed the tribe of Levi by saying, Yoru Mishpatecha Yaakov. You will disseminate and give direction of the laws to the Jewish people. You will be the disseminators of the Torah. Yoru Mishpatecha. Hora means leading, elucidating, giving direction, giving perspective. Torah itself is the Moreh Derech. What's the guide of how a Jew has to live his life? It's the Torah. That's the guidebook. That's the prescription of life. So what is Torah all about? It's about how a Jew has to live his life. What are his obligations? What's permitted? What's not permitted? What's obligatory? That's what it's about. So if Torah is that, what relevance does the backdrop of creation, that God is the creator of the world? What relevance does that have to Torah? If Torah itself quantifies Torah as Torah, which is the prescription of life, how a Jew has to live his life, the first book of the Bible, of the Torah, seemingly has no relevance to what Torah is all about. That's Rabbi Yitzchak's question. So why does the Torah begin with the story of creation, of how existence came into being? That's the understanding of that question. So Rabbi Yitzchak answers, he cites a verse in Tehillim, in Psalms. David HaMelech says, Koach Masov Higid Labo. The power of his actions he shared with his people. Losis Lem Nachlas Goyim. To give them the portion of the nations. The power of his actions, the result of his actions, he shared, he told to his people. to give them nachlos goyim, to give them the portion of the nations. What does this mean? So he explains. Shim yomer umas ha'olam l'Yisrael listim atem. The world could come to the Jews says, you're a bunch of interlopers. You're a bunch of plunderers. Where did you have a right to take over Canaan, which was occupied by 7 nations of Canaan? You destroyed them to take over the land. You people, you live without conscience. You have no morals, you have no ethics, you have no scruples. They could attack us with that claim. So what do we, and this is what God says to us. Omrim lahem. So we say, Kol ha'oretz shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The world in its entirety belongs to God. Who bra unisana. God created and gave it. God chooses to endow and he chooses to take back. He gave it to them, and when he felt they weren't worthy, he took it from them. And he gave it to us eternally. So God is sharing that with us. But again, it's koach masav higid labo, the power of his actions he told to his people. So who is it to know? It's for us to know. To live with guilt or to live without conscience is impossible. God says, I want to explain it to you. I am the creator. I endow. Initially, I endowed it to who I endowed it to. But as I gave it, I have a right to retake it. And when I took it back, I gave it to you. So the world accuses you of whatever they accuse you. It should fall on deaf ears because I'm giving you the inside story on this. It's mine to give and mine to give and mine to take. I've given to you now eternally. It's yours. Not that we have to respond to the world. Because if we tell the world that, is the world paying attention? Do they want to hear? Do they believe in that reality? You have a pagan world, they don't believe in God. You can tell them about God. They don't know who he is. They talk about the sun god and the moon god and the wind and the god of fertility. Has nothing to do with this. It's not for them to know. It's for us to know. What is our rights? Here we live a moral and ethical code. And yet we go, we conquer, we kill, and we take. Why are we taking? We're taking as God's agents. God says, you shall conquer the land and remove those nations from the earth. That's koach masav higid lamo. The power of his actions he's sharing with his people. To give them nachlos goyim, to give them the portion of the goyim. That's why the Torah begins with what? With the story of creation. Because what is the playing field, the main playing field of a Jew? Where does the Jew belong? Where's the Jew supposed to actualize and advance his spirituality? In the Holy Land. The Eretz Yisrael. Eretz Yisrael is called Eretz HaKadosh, the Holy Land. The only location in existence that does not have an archangel. Overseeing that location is only Israel. Every other location on the earth has an archangel representing that particular nation. Therefore, that land was reserved for the Jewish people because the objective of creation is what? Torah, and the only people who have relevance to that Torah are only the Jewish people. And the location to actualize that Torah is the promised land, is Israel. So, but they'll come to you and say, but how do you have a right? David says, Koch masav higid lamo. The power of his actions he shared with his people. To give them nachlos goyim, to give them the portion of the goyim, of the nations. The Mishnah tells us in one location that we all know that a Jew has to live by the Torah. But if it's a question of life and death, life supersedes the Torah. Person's deathly ill, and you violate the Shabbos. You violate the Shabbos. You're obligated to violate the Shabbos. You must violate dietary laws. You violate dietary laws. You must do many things. Human life is supreme. It takes priority over the Torah itself, except in 3 areas: murder, idolatry, and adultery and incest. But outside of that, human life is first and foremost. Now, a man is accused that he committed murder, or he transgressed the transgression which carries the death penalty. Witnesses testify. The witnesses are interrogated to make sure that the testimony is accurate. There's no discrepancy in the testimony of the 2 witnesses. The 2 credible, qualified witnesses. But before they're even interrogated, what does the court say to them? What we call this Bezdin, this rabbinical court. It's not an ordinary court. This court are ordained, they have the ordination from Moshe Rabbeinu. That's their level of ordination. That their verdict could bring about the death penalty. They say to the witnesses, we want to explain to you what the consequence of our verdict will be. The human being is the only species that was created as a single being. Every other living being was created as a unit. There was a male and a female. Adam initially was created only as a male. There was no counterpart. It was only afterwards God created the female to assist him in his objective. Why did God create Adam as a single entity, not with a counterpart initially? Why? It's to communicate a lesson. B'shvili divrei olam. That when Adam came on the scene and he looked at this existence, he says, it's unbelievable. I'm one person, and God created a universe, terrestrial, celestial, and beyond that, all for me. So what does that say? It tells me what's needed for me to address my spiritual potential. I need a whole universe. That's how great and unlimited my potential is. You need a whole universe to address it. So by you taking an innocent life and ending that life, how tragic is that? So unless you know beyond any doubt that this man is guilty of the death penalty, you have no right to testify. You should walk away and not testify. So the human being, that God created existence, that means every aspect of existence has some relevance for him to address his spirituality. That's the message, that's the takeaway, initially. Because that's what he has to say. All this existence was created for me alone. That's how unlimited my potential is. There's a Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, which tells us, Basar Ma'amoros Nivra Olam. God created the world with 10 utterances. And the Midrash speaks about what the 10 utterances were. Why? If God, there's nothing beyond God's ability, he could have created the world with 1 utterance. Why do you have to create it with 10 utterances? So the Mishnah tells us, because to punish the evil who chose to destroy the world through their misbehavior. With 1, he couldn't punish them. But with 10, and to give reward to the tzaddikim who maintained the world, which came about through 10 utterances. So the obvious question is, in God invested a greater degree of investment, so he should be able to punish the evil to a greater degree. Is that God's interest? God doesn't even want to punish the guilty. As we said in the Nila service, God doesn't want the death of the Rasha. He prefers he does tshuva. And here, the Mishnah tells us there were 10 utterances, so he should be able to punish the evil to a greater degree. How do we understand it? This is the question the Maharal of Prague asks. So he says something phenomenal. The Maharal of Prague. Let's say God, we've created the world with one utterance, or with two utterances, five utterances. And then the world itself, meaning manifested itself from four utterances, five utterances. You could say there's no symmetry in existence. One thing has nothing to do with another. They're disparate parts, unrelated to one another. Meaning you can't read the script to understand that each one is there to complement the other. Now, what's the difference between 9 ones and 10 ones? 9 ones is 9 individual ones. When you have 10, 10 creates a unit. 10 may be comprised of 10 ones, but the 10 have relevance to one another because they create the unit of 10 of 1. The first unit of 10. 10 is a unit. That God chose to create the world with 10 utterances is to give the person a sense and an understanding that everything complements everything else. Even though they seem to be unrelated, but if the 10 utterances, that means it all comes together to create one. If he would have created with less than 10, person can say, it was too complicated to figure out. It seemed to be there's no rhyme or reason. But if there's 10, there's rhyme and reason. Because each one of the ones a part of the 10, that means they all together create a symmetry, which creates one entity. The Rosh should have picked it up. And if you would have realized that, you would have utilized the world differently than you utilized it. So that's what it means. There were 10 utterances. As a result of now, the Rasha, the evil one, is culpable. Because why didn't you read the script right? There's enough there information. You should have read it right. With less than 10, I couldn't fault you. But 10, now you can be faulted. That's what it means to punish the evil. Now you have no wiggle room to get out of it. Till now, there's wiggle room. And to give the tzaddik his due reward because he read it right, understanding that it's 10, that everything complements everything else, everything supports and everything's intermeshed. Therefore, he understands there's one God, there's one objective, and there's nothing superfluous, and there's nothing random, because each piece fits perfectly to create the total picture. So let's get back to the beginning. Why did God create existence? Olam Chesed Yibareh. It was God's indiscriminate kindness, because he wanted man to be ultimately the beneficiary of creation. Because if man succeeds in his choices, he will be the beneficiary of the ultimate. What is the ultimate? To be able to be beneficiary of the ultimate good, which is a relation with God, which is good on the absolute level. That's the chesed. Now, we find creation. We know the various appellations for God. The appellation of Elokim. What does it connote? Elokim connotes the attribute of justice. Exactness. Exactness. And if you read the narrative of creation, the Yomer Elokim, Elokim said, "Ye or let there be light." God said, separate between the upper waters and low waters, and continuously every day of creation, continuously the appellation which is God identifies with is Elokim, the attribute of justice. And all of a sudden, when it comes to creation of man, it says Hashem Elokim. Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, the 4-letter name of God, connotes the attribute of mercy. Until man, the world was exacting with the measuring rod of exactness. Man, God can't be so exacting any longer. Why? Because if God would be exacting, which is the attribute of justice, man would not survive. Because man has a tendency, is prone to fail. So unless the human being is given multiple chances to recover and make amends and correction, man couldn't survive existence. So because the human being could not survive that measuring rod of exactness, God intermingled the attribute of, coalesced the attribute of mercy into the attribute of justice. Therefore, man has endless chances to do the right thing. And God has all the time in the world and is willing to give the time to the human being to make the correction. As many years as he has, even till the last moment of his life, for that reason. Now, it's interesting. Initially, God, why did he create existence? Because it's due to God's indiscriminate kindness. And what would have that been? An existence which is created with the attribute of justice. So what is the attribute of justice? That's the ultimate level of kindness. It's only because man himself couldn't survive that evaluation, God had to introduce the attribute of mercy. But what would have been in man's best interest? To be under the gun. The moment you deviate as much as an iota, there's a consequence. There's a reaction. That's called justice. But if that would happen, you're not going to have many survivors. As a result of that, God coalesced into creation the attribute of mercy. And that's what a person can do tshuva. You can repent. That's how you make amends. You have remorse, you regret for the wrong, and you commit yourself to what? To the right, to correct behavior. That's the understanding. So it's interesting. The ultimate chesed is what? Is the attribute of justice. Because that keeps you mean and lean on the straight and narrow path. But factually, man has a short memory, short attention span. And if that's the case, we got problems. The person's going off the cliff. God had no choice but to introduce the attribute of mercy for that reason. But the ultimate chesed would have been the attribute of what? Of justice. Now, we find the Gemara tells over a story that Rabbi Akiva, being one of the 10 martyrs, was murdered and killed at a level of cruelty not to be imagined. Rabbi Akiva. And the Gemara tells us that Rabbi Akiva, being from the greatest Torah sages, was able to extract endless laws from the crowns on every letter in the Torah. So Hashem says to Moshe Rabbeinu, I want to show you who's coming down the pike. And he sees this great Torah sage, Rabbi Akiva. And he says, what's his end? What's his end going to be? And he shows him how his flesh is being scathed off his body with metal knives. So Moshe says, if this is the greatness of Torah, is that the reward? Is that the reward for what? For the Torah they brought into existence? So Hashem says, this was my original intent in creation. What does that mean? It means this. When Rabbi Akiva was put to death in this most cruel way, demonic way, what was Rabbi Akiva doing? He was smiling. His students were crying. And he says to his students who are crying, he says, why are you crying? Don't you realize I was waiting for this moment my whole life? God gave me the opportunity to demonstrate my love by giving my life. This is the ultimate. Therefore, you shouldn't cry. So why did Reb Kiva process it in his context, and why did the students process it in their own context? They were crying, and he was ecstatic. He was in a state of ecstasy. They were crying because the only person who was able to give them an understanding of Torah at that level was only Rabbi Akiva. So if Rabbi Akiva dies and is put to death, what are they? They're orphaned. They're in the dark. So for them, it's a loss. But Rabbi Akiva, as great as he is, God says you have to give your life to sanctify my name. That means the mitzvah of sanctification of God's name, to demonstrate your love for God by giving your life, has greater value than all the Torah Rabbi Akiva could disseminate and could elucidate. So for Rabbi Akiva, he's the beneficiary of giving it all up because he was so great. That was Rabbi Akiva. So the person who's at a level who's able to process and accept the attribute of justice, that's the way to go. Because that means if you're at that level, that's the ultimate level of Kiddush Hashem, sanctification of God's name. And when you leave this existence, you leave debt-free. Debt-free, that there's no claim against you any longer. So this is the ultimate moment of opportunity. Therefore, Rabbi Akiva was in a state of ecstasy. He says, now I've come to a moment. I'm able to demonstrate my love for God by giving my life, despite the fact of the context of to what degree they butchered him. He says, how can I not be in a state of ecstasy? This is the ultimate objective, to show that every fiber of my being, its value is only for God. That's a true servant of God. That was Rabbi Akiva. But that was the original intent of creation. But how many Rabbi Akivas do you have? You could count them not even on one finger. Therefore, since the vast majority of mankind throughout history could not tolerate this exact evaluation, therefore, it's midas harachmim. That's the attribute of mercy. And that's what Hashem says to Moshe. That was my original intent. For those few who are able to withstand this evaluation, this exactness, which brings about that ultimate level of Kiddush Hashem, it's still in place. It's not God changed the program for all humanity. It's only for those who don't have the capacity to be dealt with in the context of exactness, as Rabbi Akiva and a few others. Rabbi Akiva's Rebbe also had, Rabbi Akiva's Rebbe, his teacher was Nochem Shen Gamzu. Nochem, the man of Gamzu, also towards the end of his life, he was blind. He was a paraplegic. He had sores all over his body. He suffered tremendously because he felt short of a certain mitzvah which he should have done, and he didn't do it with alacrity. And when his students saw him, they said, "It's terrible. We see you in such a state." He says, "No, you don't understand. If you wouldn't see me in this state, it would be terrible." He saw it the other way. He put everything in perspective. It's for the best. Because if it wouldn't be this way, it will be tragic any other way. But for the average human being, what is it? Let's talk about the Holocaust. The Holocaust, no question, was the attribute of justice. Do we understand it? We don't understand it. Why? The people who were taken, who were the victims, were they really that culpable, that they deserved that level of annihilation, the level of genocide, that they were victimized by the Nazis? Yimach Shmam V'Zichram. So the Ramchal explains that the times where the attribute of justice demands a certain level of response, which God can't silence Satan any longer. And we're talking about communal responsibility. And this is cumulative over generations. This could have been 500 years of debt, spiritual debt, which it was so off balance. To reset the spiritual balance, such tragedy had to take place. Although the people themselves, based on the principle of attribute of mercy, should have continued. But when the attribute of justice is implemented, you can't be perfect enough, because nobody's perfect. The Rechaim HaKadosh cites, the Talmud says in one location, even the Avos HaKadoshim, the holy patriarchs, were not able to tolerate the attribute of justice. Moshe Rabbeinu in Zosah Bracha is referred to as Ish Elokim. He's the man of Elokim. Why is he called Ish Elokim? Because he was one of the few who was able to live with the evaluation, the exactness of the attribute of justice. Even the Avos HaKadoshim, the patriarchs were not able to. But sometimes God has to implement that to set the balance right. And that's why every once in a while, whether it's the Crusades, whether it's Chmielnicki, or whether it's the Holocaust, that's to reset the equilibrium, to balance and Satan to silence for endless years into the future. And hopefully never again until the coming of Mashiach. Yitzhak Hashem, for that reason. Just want to end with one thing, with one point. What is the objective of creation? The Torah. The Torah itself is what? King Solomon says in Mishlei, Emes Keneg al Timkor, acquire truth and don't sell truth. And I've said this many times, name it a moral. The word Emes, if you take the aleph away from Emes, what are two letters that are left? Mem Tov, Mes, means death. That's what's left. That means the Torah itself is unadulterated truth on the absolute level. If you diminish it, even as much as an iota, it's no longer truth. So what is the Torah? The Torah is exact. It's exactness. Truth is exact. Because if you alter it even as much as an iota, it's no longer truth. So if the objective of creation, what was the blueprint of creation? The Midrash tells us, God looked into the Torah and he created the world. The playing field is the world. But what is the playing field? For what objective? To fulfill the Torah. So if fulfilling the Torah is the exactness of the Torah, so how exact is the creation taken off that blueprint, which is exact? It has to be exact. Everything has to be exact. Because it all reflects the exactness of the Torah itself, which is truth. So once you go in that direction, man has a problem. Because man is not perfect. And man is prone to fail. As a result of that, he has to alter it slightly for the sake of man, not the world, but man's predicament and evaluation. Therefore, he has to be given endless chances to make amends, to make the corrections. Otherwise, he could not survive.